Let's open. I'll read. We left off last week at the end of the sixth plague, the plague of boils. I'm gonna reread that. And this plague is unique. It's not exactly in the middle, but it does end with, it ends a little differently than the rest. So we're gonna talk about that to start. This is Exodus 9, verse 8 through 17, I'll read. Then the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Take for yourselves handfuls of soot from a kiln, and let Moses throw it toward the sky in the sight of Pharaoh. It will become fine dust over all the land of Egypt, and it will become boils breaking out with swords on man and beast, through all the land of Egypt." So they took the soot from a kiln, stood before Pharaoh, and Moses threw it towards the sky, and it became boils, breaking out with swords on man and beast. The Egyptians could not stand before Moses because of the boils, for the boils were on the magicians as well as on all the Egyptians. And the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not listen to them, just as the Lord had spoken to Moses. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Rise up early in the morning, and stand before Pharaoh, and say to him, 'Thus says the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, let my people go, that they may serve me. For this time I will send all my plagues on you and your servants and your people, so that you may know that there is no one like me in all the earth. For if by now I had put forth my hand and struck you and your people with pestilence, you would then have been cut off from the earth. But indeed for this reason I have allowed you to remain, in order to show you my power, and in order to proclaim my name through all the earth. Still, you exalt yourself against my people by not letting them go.'" Let's turn to the Lord in prayer. Lord, once again, we come before you to worship you, to gather together, to encourage one another. And Lord, I just pray that you bless our time. Help us to understand these things and to learn what you would have us learn, so that we would be effective tools for you. And for Jesus' sake, I pray. Amen. Mm-hmm. All right. So I didn't mention last week the whole idea of taking soot from a kiln. I wonder if there was any sort of underlying reason. I mean, we would certainly see it today, right? The slaves who worked the kilns, because they were making bricks, right? That was one of their main jobs. Bringing from the kilns that they have to operate this soot to throw into the air, and the soot would become oils on all it landed on. And then in verse 12, this is the number 7 time, the 7th time that Pharaoh's heart has been hardened. This time it's the Lord. And then what we have is different. In this case, Moses up to this point has always been sent to Pharaoh to ask for the people to be let go and to introduce the next plague, right? And in this case, it's really more of just a side comment that the Lord's making directly to Pharaoh, right? So he's sent to Pharaoh, and I'm guessing Pharaoh, just like his magicians and other leaders with him, is probably in a sad state, full of boils and whatnot, very uncomfortable. And in that environment, he goes to Pharaoh and says, "Let my people go, that they may serve me." So he does request, but then he just goes right into. It doesn't seem like he waits for an answer, right? He just runs right into verse 14. "I will send all my plagues on you and your servants and your people, so that you will know that there is no one like me in all the earth." We already had during the plague of the mites, or where the dust became living and crawled over everything. The magician's telling Pharaoh this is the finger of God. So you've already got some of his counselors telling him, "Look, we can't. Not only can we not do this, but this is a miracle of size and proportion, scope that we don't understand." And so, if Pharaoh paid any attention, he would know this. But God's making it clear that these things should make it clear to all the Egyptians that there is no God like God. What does it do for the Israelites? Do you think it has the same impact? There's no God like our God. What does it do for us today? Same thing, right? We're meant to see in these plagues that God is in control of all nature, in control of his creation. He can do what he wills. And then verse 15, for if by now I had put forth my hand and struck you and your people with pestilence, you would then have been cut off from the earth. I mean, what was the plague right before the boils? All the cattle in the field, poof, just dead. So this should be a threat that carries weight. And interestingly enough here, we are not given Pharaoh's response. We're just given what Moses said. So we do not know for sure what Pharaoh thought of these words. Again, the Lord has just hardened his heart, so I would assume he just sat there smoldering and I'm not listening. I don't care what you say, Moses. Would be my guess, but he did. There's no response recorded. And then verse 16 is an interesting one. But indeed, for this reason, I have allowed you to remain, in order to show you my power, and in order to proclaim my name through all the earth. So sometimes God withholds his judgment, and sometimes God metes out his judgment slowly, painfully. Now, our non-Christian friends can look at this and say, God's capricious. God makes his decisions willy-nilly. And by that, they are angry at God. They're in, I don't know how you're more in rebellion, but they're more firm in their rebellion, right? Because they don't want to trust in a God who can do these things. And again, I think it's dual purpose. What we're being told here is so that his name would be known through all the earth. And I think one of the byproducts is that not only do they come to know that there is a God, even though they don't like it, and even though they don't want to follow him, but those who were wicked but changed by God also know that there's a God. So, and then verse 17, still some of you exalt yourself against my people by not letting them go. So, any thoughts on that section? It's kind of a good recap of what it's like to be in unbelief. I'm showing you my signs, I'm showing you who I am, what I can do, and still
I was looking at verse 16 and thinking, sometimes when we're going through difficult times, don't we kind of want God to say that, to tell us what the purpose is. Even though we don't want to hear what he told Pharaoh. I think it's kind of interesting that God tells Moses to actually tell Pharaoh what his purpose is. Yeah. We don't always know that.
Yeah.
We don't usually know it.
Yeah, and I expect during this time, in spite of the fact that the Egyptians are getting kind of their just desserts at this point, the Hebrews still have to make their bread. They're still working for the Egyptians. I'm guessing they weren't also joyful about it, even though there was probably that idea of good riddance. They deserve it. But I heard a comment today. I wish this was true of all of us, but of one patient, a Christian nurse spoke of a patient who was going through a painful cancer, that he was inappropriately joyful. again, think of that New Testament command by Paul, be joyful always, and rejoice in the Lord. We find that hard in our troubles, don't we? The Israelites are no different, even for those who trusted in the Lord. Yeah.
You wonder during this time, like, God says, to make my name known in the whole earth. You wonder how far the news of what was going on in Egypt spread at that time. Like, because there had to be travelers, there had to be people that have, like, don't go to Egypt right now. There's something going on. God of the Hebrews is punishing them for something. And, there had to have been some amount of word that traveled, at least regionally and stuff around the surrounding areas of what was going on.
I would think so. I mean, after all the cattle died, again, it was just the cattle in the field, but throughout the rest of the plagues, the beasts are talked about over and over. So did they acquire, like we talked about last week, did they acquire more? Did they go outside of their bounds? And if you go to your neighbor and try to buy 1,000 camels, wait a minute, Egypt, you've never asked us for our animals, what's going on? So, yeah, there would have been some, I think. And they were the power of this time, so. All right. So from this point forward, the plagues become more deadly. Up to this time, they are annoying, painful, undesirable. But from this point on, they become deadly. And again, it's hard to know. We don't really have a clear. It reads like these things are bang, 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 but we really have no idea what is the passage of time. I think it's fair to say that all of these things happen in at least one growing season, because otherwise it doesn't really make sense how these next ones come, in that each one affects the crops till they're all dead, they're all gone. All right, I will read, and this is the longer one. This is the plague of hail. I'm going to read verses 18 to 35 just so we get it in full context. Behold, about this time tomorrow, I will send a heavy hail, such as has not been seen in Egypt from the day it was founded until now. Now therefore bring your livestock and whatever you have in the field to safety, every man and beast that is found in the field and is not brought home. When the hail comes down and at them, they will die. The one among the servants of Pharaoh who feared the word of the Lord made his servants and his livestock flee into their houses. But he who paid no regard to the word of the Lord left his servants and his livestock in the field. Now the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand toward the sky, and that hail may fall on all the land of Egypt, on man and on beast, on every plant of the field throughout the land of Egypt. Moses stretched out his staff towards the sky, and the Lord sent thunder and hail, and fire ran down to the earth. And the Lord rained hail on the land of Egypt, so that there was hail and fire flashing continually in the midst of the hail, very severe, such as has not been in the land of Egypt since it became a nation. The hail struck all that was in the field, through all the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and hail also struck every plant of the field and shattered every tree on the field. Only in the land of Goshen, where the sons of Israel were, there was no hail. Then Pharaoh sent for Moses, and Aaron said to them, I have sinned this time. The Lord is the righteous one, and I and my people are the wicked ones. Make supplication to the Lord, for there has been enough of God's thunder and hail, and I will let you go, and you shall stay no longer. Moses said to him, as soon as I go out of the city, I will spread out my hands to the Lord. The thunder will cease, and there will be hail no longer, that you may know that the earth is the Lord's. But as for you and your servants, I know that you do not yet fear the Lord God. Now the flax and the barley were ruined, for the barley was in the ear and the flax was in the bud. But the wheat and the spelt were not ruined, for they ripened late. So Moses went out of the city from Pharaoh and spread out his hands to the Lord, and the thunder and the hail ceased, and the rain no longer poured on the earth. But when Pharaoh saw that the rain and the hail and the thunder had ceased, he sinned again and hardened his heart, he and his servants. Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he did not let the sons of Israel go, just as the Lord had spoken through Moses. so this is the seventh plague. And presumably, at least to us, it reads as if this is the same conversation. Moses was sent to Pharaoh the day after. Well, in the morning. So I shouldn't say the day after. So the Lord said to Moses, rise up early in the morning and stand before Pharaoh. That's verse 13 of chapter 9. I think this is the same conversation. It might not be, but so sometime after the plague of boils, or during the plague of boils, he goes and speaks, and then the hail comes. The interesting thing is, there's no talk of flooding with this. So Egypt is not, it's drier than here, right? They get less rain than we do. So a storm of this magnitude would have been unheard of, number one. It's according to the words here, it's like no other storm they've ever had. But they don't get much rain to begin with. And the idea that the clouds would be this big on the edge of the desert there is, I don't think we have a natural explanation for it. This time God did allow a warning that would provide safety. So, I have the question, verse 19. Now, therefore send, bring your livestock and whatever you have in the field to safety, every man and beast that is found in the field and is not brought home when the hail comes down, and then they will die. I doubt Pharaoh sent out his messengers to all his people to say, by the way, if you do this, you might be okay. Were there people in his courts that maybe did it behind his back? How did some of the Egyptians know? Now, in verse 20, I have the question too of the one among the servants of Pharaoh. It reads almost like there was one person. I don't know if that's fair, because one can be plural.
Mine, Joel, says those officials.
Those officials, okay.
And at least my version implies it was
Yeah.
more than one.
But was it only Pharaoh's officials in the hearing of Moses that knew about this? Were they permitted to actually share it to the rest of the people in the land?
And mine says, then whoever feared the word of the Lord among the servants of Pharaoh.
They would have probably had enough time for those that did from the court go out in fear to bring their stuff in to tell their neighbors like, hey, by the way, you might want to do this.
Yeah, but it was all of Egypt, so there would have been, a stretch of 40 miles or so to share the word up and down the Nile, which they had the capacity to do it, but I'm sure officially they couldn't. So I just have those questions, and that's really not on the Lord. That's on Pharaoh and his officials, whether they shared the news, right? But certainly there were some among the servants of Pharaoh that had come to actually fear the Lord. Did they trust the Lord? We don't know, but they feared him. They trusted his word, at least in this regard, to save themselves and their servants and their cattle.
You'd think based on all the weird things that have been happening, even if they didn't really fear the Lord, they'd think, oh, maybe this is something else weird. And seek cover.
Threats real.
Yeah. Well, I wonder if, there's hints of what goes on today, right? Where maybe they were buying the tabloids to try to figure out what was happening, rather than the tabloids might have had it right, while the official Pharaoh newspaper said everything's fine, nothing to see here. Yeah, one of the things that's very interesting with this, I mean, when things go bad in a country, oftentimes people revolt. There's no talk of Pharaoh having any issues with his throne during this time. So that's just an interesting side note. But anyways, verse 21, but he who paid no regard to the word of the Lord left his servants and his livestock in the field. So there were certainly those who heard this warning, and in spite of all they'd seen so far, and in spite of all they've experienced, still disregarded the word of the Lord. Verse 22 and 23, there's an interesting thing that comes out in the last couple of plagues where the Lord, instead of saying stretch out the staff, says stretch out your hand. And for whatever reason, Moses uses the staff. And the other thing that's happening here is Moses is the one stretching out the staff. We know later on, God asks Moses to do things and he does them in anger, and he is therefore not permitted to go into the land of Canaan. But I wonder if even during this time, if there was already signs of him doing not exactly all the things that God asked. But anyway, not to say, because it never calls him out for doing such. It just says that in verse 22, now the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand towards the sky. And then in 23, Moses stretched out his staff towards the sky.
But your hand is with your staff.
I know. I'm just calling out what I'm seeing there. Again, there's never a time where he says, hey Moses, there was a couple times in Egypt where you just didn't do it exactly like I told you. So, again, it's possible that was by design, and he was totally doing it as God told him. All right. So verse 23, fire ran down to the earth, and the Lord rained hail on the land of Egypt. So do you think that's lightning, thunder and lightning, or do you think that's...
New translations lightning instead of fire.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. And clearly that may also be a case where they're using the words of the day and the understanding of the day. I don't know, I didn't look to see if lightning is a normal phenomenon in Egypt. But verse 24 sounds terrible, right? So there was hail and fire flashing continually in the midst of the hail.
Not to really compare it to this, but some years ago, Gary and I were up at Bogus skiing, and it was snowing. It was like it was at night. It was snowing, and there was lightning and thunder, and it was weird.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't dangerous. Well, I don't think it was dangerous, but it was pretty scary. It was just creepy.
Yeah.
Snow and lightning just don't go together in my mind.
Yeah.
I don't know about hail.
Yeah, and it doesn't give us the size of the hail, the idea that it would kill man and beast. But I think for that to happen, it has to be golf ball size or bigger. But I don't know if you guys have ever seen those videos of people who get stuck in a thunder shower with hail, where they're in their car and it just tears through windows. And it looks freaky. So,
Joel?
Yeah.
On that, discussion about whether it was fire or lightning, my footnotes point out several verses where the same word is used as fire and some that it's lightning.
and it's
So
just, yeah.
probably synonymous.
Or as conjecture of, depending on whether or not this was a normal phenomenon for them to even get
Good point,
lightning
yeah.
storms, then if things are catching on fire, maybe they're thinking, oh my word, there's fire coming down from the sky because things are on fire now.
Yeah.
If maybe they don't understand that the lightning causes fire and not the other way around.
Yeah, regardless, it would have been a thing to watch from Goshen. Right? I mean, we're all drawn to that, right? That there's a tornado cloud up there. How many of us do what we're supposed to do and go to the basement, right? Versus stand by the big picture window and, wow, that's amazing, right? So
Bill, your Midwest is showing.
what's that?
Your Midwest is
Yeah.
showing.
Yeah.
Hey Joel, not to go backwards, but I also find it interesting that pretty much the Lord wipes out the cattle yet again. You know, it's one of those, they've reacquired or whatever was left in the barns from the last livestock plague has now been wiped out yet again.
Yeah.
And it feels like the economy is just swirling, if you will, downward.
Yeah, Lucky Joe, last time he had his cows in the barn, so he's doing okay, he's looking okay, and this time
Not so
they're out in
much.
the field, and so not so much, poor Joe. Now you're like the rest of us.
Or
Yeah.
you traded with your neighbors, right? And it's
Yeah.
like you just acquired it and now you just lost all of that you just traded for.
Yeah, and again, the cattle of the Israelites was not affected, so, we're not told, of course, how much commerce happened between the two, but they may have ended up selling a lot of their cattle for gold and silver.
I wonder how much some of them bartered to try to get their livestock to go use Goshen temporarily.
Well, that's it, yeah, that's the other thing, but again, I think the Israelites were looked at as, well, now slaves, but also as detestable sheep herders, so. All right, and then verse 25 and 26, we get an idea of the actual devastation, right? Everything that was in the field, man and beast, and plant and tree, was shattered. So, and then we also get the idea that it was, further down we find out that not all fields were yet at that place where this would have destroyed them. It would have flattened them and affected the harvest, but not, or the yield, but didn't completely destroy absolutely everything. But don't worry, God's going to do. Later on, the wheat and the, the wheat and
The emmer wheat.
wheat and the spelt. Well, spelt is just a form of wheat.
Yeah.
The wheat and the wheat, it'll be taken care of later. I know spelt is not exactly wheat, it's slightly different. All right, so verse 27 and 28,
I have
yeah.
a bit on the spelt. It was saying here that barley, the flax and barley were in flower, but the wheat and spelt had not germinated, so I'm thinking spelt is just not germinated as a flower yet, so maybe like I'm not a farmer, but maybe the second blooming of it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've got someone here who's gonna totally tell me that I'm not correct here completely. But most of our grains, they're all grasses. And as they grow, they're just grass. They're bendable, they're green shoots. But when they reach that point where the seeds come out, even regular grass does this, the stem that has the grass or the seeds on it will actually die and kind of dry out, and the seeds finish their ripening in that process. Wheat's a little different in that the whole plant kind of turns into that brown color. Yeah, so verses 27 and 28, something's different this time. Pharaoh sent for Moses and Aaron and didn't just straight out ask for them to remove the plague and pray to the Lord. He actually says, I have sinned this time. The Lord is the righteous one. I and my people are the wicked ones. And then he asks that the Lord would remove the plague. What are we to make of that? We know his heart's hard. We're going to see at the end of this plague his heart is hardened again.
He's being a politician.
Is he being a politician? Is there actually some amount of truth in what he says? Or is he just using words he knows might get him something? It's a question. We can't see in the mind of Pharaoh. We don't know.
I feel like 28 spells it out pretty good there, for we have had enough thunder and hail, like, whatever it takes to stop this, like, I've had enough.
Yeah, Moses, good job. We get it. There's a God. We know he's righteous. We're not. Remove it, okay? We get it. We got this. I got the point, right? Yeah, it could be that. It could be that. I think, again, I don't know if I'm being generous. It could be that Pharaoh sees the goodness of God, and he sees, but he just doesn't want to have any part of it. I don't know if you guys have ever had any friends or acquaintances who, they hear the gospel, they understand the gospel, and they choose a different path because they just don't see the benefit of the gospel as being that great for them. They'd rather have some other things. So they can go as far as saying, yep, I get that God is good. I get that God, that I'm a sinner, and you know what? I just want to go on sinning. So I don't know if that's what's going on here or not. But this comes up, this plague and the next plague, where Pharaoh offers this idea that I know that I'm sinning. And I agree with Tony, there's kind of two thoughts here. Either he's just being a straight out politician trying to get what he can and what he wants, or there is a recognition here, and for whatever reason, due to his hardness of heart, he is saying, but it's not for me. But I'm going to use the words to try to get what I want. All right, then 29 through 32, Moses said to him, as soon as I go out of the city, I will spread out my hands to the Lord, and the thunder will cease, and there will be hail no longer, that you may know that the earth is the Lord's. But as for you and your servants, I find verse 29 interesting, because this time he's confident. Moses, confident, says, I know the Lord will answer my prayer. But he's still going to go out of the city, and he's going to pray. And verse 30, I mean, we have Moses' response. So Moses, according to what he's saying, as for you and your servants, I know that you do not yet fear the Lord God. So, and we have a comment here written by the author, or that's the recording of Moses' thoughts later. But they were still thinking, you know what? This has been a bad year. But we still have our wheat and our spelt, so we're still going to be okay, right? If we can just get God to relent, we'll still be okay. We'll still have food. And then verse 34, but when Pharaoh saw the rain and the hail and the thunder had ceased, he sinned again and hardened his heart, he and his servants. So whatever his thought was, whatever his heart was at that moment in that thought, regardless, we know that when he saw the thunder and hail stopped, he sinned again and did what was wrong. And really, to put a good point on it, the sin is unbelief, right? That's the problem here. Is he has a recognition that the Lord is righteous and he is sinful. Again, maybe they were just words, but if they were more than just words, when the problem went away, you know, like I've heard the comment that there is no unbeliever or there is no one who doesn't pray when in the foxhole in a war, right? Every soldier calls out to the Lord when their life is on the line. And then 35. Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he did not let the sons of Israel go, just as the Lord had spoken through Moses. So there's a tension there between verse 34 and 35. 34 seems to be more that Pharaoh is hardening his heart. And then if we go to 10 verse 1, then the Lord said to Moses, go to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart. So I think even though 35 doesn't call out clearly that it's the Lord hardening his heart, I think we are meant to see there that God is doing it. So, but there's that tension that seems to be, God and Pharaoh are in parallel paths here, right? 34, he's hardening his heart, and God is hardening it too. And this is the 8th time his heart was hardened. Anything in the hail that we didn't talk about that you guys noticed? All right, we'll start the locusts then. So this is chapter 10. I'll read verses 1 through 20. And we won't finish it, but we'll see what we can do here. Then the Lord said to Moses, go to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the heart of his servants, that I may perform these signs of mine among them. And that you may tell in the hearing of your sons and your grandsons how I made a mockery of the Egyptians, and how I performed my signs among them, that you may know that I am the Lord. Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and said to him, thus says the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, how long will you refuse to humble yourself before me? Let my people go, that they may serve me. For if you refuse to let my people go, behold, tomorrow I bring locusts into your territory. They shall cover the surface of the land, so that no one will be able to see the land. They will also eat of the rest of what has escaped, what is left to you from the hail, and they will eat every tree which sprouts for you out of the field. Then your houses shall be filled, and the houses of all your servants, and the houses of all the Egyptians, something which neither your fathers nor your grandfathers have seen from the day that they came upon the earth until this day. And he turned and went out from Pharaoh. Pharaoh's servant said to him, how long will this man be a snare to us? Let the men go, that they may serve the Lord their God. Do you not realize that Egypt is destroyed? So Moses and Aaron were brought back to Pharaoh, and he said to them, go, serve the Lord your God. Who are the ones who are going? Moses said, we shall go with our young and our old, with our sons and our daughters, with our flocks and our herds. So we shall go, for we must hold a feast to the Lord. Then he said to them, thus may the Lord be with you, if ever I let you and your little ones go. Take heed, for evil is in your mind. Not so, go now, the men among you, and serve the Lord, for that is what you desire. So they were driven out from Pharaoh's presence. Then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the land of Egypt for the locusts, that they may come upon the land of Egypt and eat every plant of the land, even all that the hail is left. So Moses stretched out his staff over the land of Egypt, and the Lord directed an east wind on the land all that day and all that night. And when it was morning, the east wind brought the locusts. The locusts came up over all the land of Egypt and settled in all the territory of Egypt. They were very numerous. There had never been so many locusts, nor would there be so many again. For they covered the surface of the whole land, so that the land was darkened, and they ate every plant of the land, and all the fruit of the trees, and the hail that the hail had left. Thus nothing green was left on tree or plant of the field through all the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh hurriedly called for Moses and Aaron and said, I have sinned against the Lord your God and against you. Now therefore please forgive my sin only this once, and make supplication to the Lord your God, that he would only remove this death from me. He went out from Pharaoh and made supplication to the Lord. So the Lord shifted the wind to the very strong west, which took the locusts and drove them into the Red Sea. Not one locust was left in all the territory of Egypt. But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not let the sons of Israel go. All right. we'll just take it in order, I guess. Verses 1 and 2, again, we have this idea of, I have hardened the Pharaoh's heart, and why? So that he might become known among all people, but also that it would be something that would be in the remembrance of the Israelites, because they're going to remember the slavery. They're going to remember how they were freed, and what God did. Verses 3 to 6, similar to other plagues. Although there is a slight difference there. How long, verse 3, how long will you refuse to humble yourself before me? That is not a phrase that has come up before. But again, after the sixth plague, God said, you're keeping yourself, you're honoring yourself instead of me. And so this seems to be appropriate now, to remind him that still is what's going on. And again, if you don't listen and let us go, this will happen. This time we have some of Pharaoh's servants actually speaking up and saying, "No, Pharaoh, maybe, just maybe, we should say something, don't you think?" But you can see the hardness in both the servants of Pharaoh as well as Pharaoh himself, right? They had no intention of letting the people go as God required. They were negotiating, right? It's okay, we'll let you go, but again, Moses reminds us who's going? Oh, no. Not that many. We're going to have a much smaller list of people go. And so, since God is unwilling to let them go as God has asked, the plague comes. Again, verses 12 and verse 13, we have that play of stretch out your hand, and Moses stretches out the staff, calling it out. Not sure it means anything. And then with this one, we have this idea of the wind being involved. So the wind comes from the east, and the land is covered with locusts. There are those who want to say, see, God can control the wind, but he can't control the locusts. The locusts are just they're just blown by the wind. God didn't make them there. Although I find that real interesting because they love to look at this section, the commentators, and say, yeah, God's using natural means to bring about this plague. But when God takes away the plague, the wind goes to which direction? The west. And what's to the west? The Red Sea. So, just say it. It's like, I just struggle with that. It's like, it's a miracle, guys. It's just, it doesn't matter how God brought it about, but ultimately it's miraculous for this many locusts to be in this land and to devastate it the way it does. And again, we don't know why this time he uses wind and then they show up, but other than to say that maybe there was some part of it which was causing some of the Egyptians to believe, oh no, the wind's blowing, what's coming next? All right. Verse 14 and 15. So there had never been so many locusts, there would never be so many again. So again, whatever this was, it was on an epic proportion. And then verse 16 to 17, again, we have this idea. Pharaoh is seemingly penitent, again saying, I have sinned. And this time he adds to it, which again, I think, I'm sort of in alignment with Tony here. I think this is sort of politics, right? I've sinned against the Lord. And you. I mean, he's upping the ante, right? Moses, this time I have to ask your forgiveness too. I think Moses is done with Pharaoh by this time. He is not very happy. In fact, we'll see in chapter 11, there is a time when Moses storms out of Pharaoh's presence because he's just so done with it. So whether that is something that Pharaoh recognizes, and that's why he says, I've sinned against you. But this idea of Moses had nothing to do with the locusts, right? He's just doing what God said. He's raising his staff, and God is bringing the locusts. God is removing them. If we recall, Pharaoh on multiple occasions asked the Lord, send someone else. I really don't want this job. I don't think I'm right for it. So the idea that somehow Pharaoh sinned against Moses is laughable. And then verse 17, forgive my sin only this once.
I thought, forgive my sin once more.
Once more? Okay. Once more makes more sense to me. Only this once is a little difficult. It's like, okay. So once more. Verse 18, we've got Moses goes from Pharaoh and makes supplication to the Lord. I think the amazing thing through this is the steadfastness of whatever Moses' opinion was of Pharaoh, whatever Moses' attitude was towards doing the Lord's work here. Each time Pharaoh asks, Moses is human. He sees the people suffering, right? And he sees Pharaoh's, and he's like, Lord. And so he keeps praying, and the Lord keeps answering the prayer as Moses prays it. And I just find, I just wonder, a few years ago we went up to Silver City when the Mormon crickets were abounding. And there's a nice little creek running through Silver City with a layer of dead crickets in it. The smell was nice. I just wonder, after the west wind that blew them all into the Red Sea, did God just change the wind back to the east so they could smell it? Just say, don't know. Yeah. And then verse 20, the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not let the sons of Israel go. So no negotiation this time, no who can go, just he decides not to let them go. That's number 9. For a number of times God has hardened Pharaoh's heart. So far it's like 5 or 6 times that, 5 or 6, maybe 7 times that Pharaoh hardened himself, but at least 3 times now God has hardened his heart. And again, I just say that because there's times where it says the heart of Pharaoh was hardened, and it's unclear who is doing the hardening. All right, then the 9th plague. I have like 2 minutes. Assuming, because we're usually very punctual with our bell. So the next one is darkness. Plague number 9. Plague number 9 is like plague number 3 and 6, where there is no audience with Pharaoh. There's no opportunity for Pharaoh to do something. Pharaoh and his people to do something to prevent the plague. So the 9th plague here starts similar to the other ones. I'll read it. It's 21 to 29. Then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand towards the sky, that there may be darkness over the land of Egypt, even a darkness which may be felt. So Moses stretched out his hand towards the sky, and there was thick darkness in all the land of Egypt for 3 days. They did not see one another, nor did anyone rise from his place for 3 days. For all the sons of Israel had lights in their dwellings. Then Pharaoh called to Moses and said, go, serve the Lord, only let your flocks and your herds be detained, even your little ones may go with you. But Moses said, you must also let us have sacrifices and burnt offerings, that we may sacrifice unto the Lord our God. Therefore our livestock too shall go with us, not a hoof shall be left behind. For we shall take some of them to serve the Lord our God. And until we arrive there, we ourselves do not know with what we may serve the Lord. But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he was not willing to let them go. Then Pharaoh said to him, "Get away from me. Beware, do not see my face again, for in the day you see my face, you shall die." And Moses said, "You are right. I shall never see your face again." All right, well, we'll talk about that in the new year.